All right, let's talk about U.S. productivity. There was some announcements, I believe it was yesterday, that the unemployment rate has fallen, which is good. And there's a lot of debate as to whether the economy is improving or not. It's pretty fascinating what's happening right now. You can find a lot of people who say this is a really good sign, and you can find some people who say this is a really bad sign. What I'm more focused on is, while the unemployment rate is falling, what's not really being acknowledged is that U.S. productivity is falling. This is a huge concern, okay? Productivity, to give you an example, is like if I had a company and I hired an accountant, and the accountant came on and he said, hey, I ran some numbers and I figured out how to switch transportation, and I moved this over here, and I moved some of these numbers over here, and what I found is I basically saved us $300,000. Let's suppose I run a medical supply company, and I'm like, oh wow, $300,000. Well, now I can hire 4 people, pay them $75,000 each, and increase my output by 4 people, whatever they would produce. It would also be like, again, productivity would be, suppose that my workers get better at their jobs and they figure out ways that they can produce even faster, right? So instead of each day they're producing 10 medical units, they produce 15 medical units, right? So not only am I able to bring on more employees, then I can produce more, sell more, and of course get paid more money to bring on more workers, etc., right? So productivity is a good thing. I mean, it increases our standard of living. If you think about Michael Dell as a case in point, I'll use him a lot. Computers used to cost $2,000, right? I mean, actually, sometimes they costed more than that, but let's say before Michael Dell really had an impact, they cost about $2,000, $3,000. Most people, if they bought a computer, they either bought a used computer or they bought one computer, okay? I've been over to many people's house now that have 3, 4, 5 computers. It's amazing. Why? Well, when a computer is only $300, you can buy several of them, right? And you can replace it. And the notion that it gets cheaper also allows you to open up your wallet. So productivity is good. I think most of us would agree that productivity is important. It increases people's standard of living. Very important. Problem is, if productivity is falling and unemployment is falling, how is unemployment falling if productivity is falling at the same time? This should be a red flag, but it's not. You're not hearing people talk about, well, unemployment's falling, but so is productivity. What's going on here? Well, any QE is not going to lead to long-term investment, and productivity requires long-term investment, right? You're not going to become Michael Dell if you're afraid that in 2 years there's going to be hyperinflation, right? I mean, you're kind of uncertain about the future. Think about all these people right now that are talking about how you need to go out and buy your own farm and raise your own crops because it's going to be ugly. Well, I'm not saying that they're wrong, because they may end up being right, but if you think about what they're actually telling you is, let's lower the standard of living because it's an uncertain environment. And I'm not saying they're giving bad advice, because they're actually giving fairly good advice because of the uncertainty. But it comes from uncertainty. QE has created an environment that nobody really fundamentally trusts, right? So productivity isn't increasing, right? So the rise in employment has little to do with productivity. That's a problem. It's questionable that this will create, that will be sustainable, I should say, in a long-term investment environment. Short-term investments create temporary short-term jobs, right, and best guesses. Think of the private tech bubble Cuban mentions, whereas long-term investments requires or creates long-term sustainable employment. This case in point, I was listening to an individual pitch a business idea, and she was like, we're going to create a website that allows people to ask for money for their wedding. And I was sitting there thinking, well, they could just ask their friends and family. Like, why would they need a website to do that? You know? And she was, talking about it like, I mean, it makes it like less of an awkward conversation. No offense, but an awkward conversation will increase your standard of living, whereas a website that just takes money from you for every dollar that's donated does not increase your standard of living. These crowdfunding sites, they don't increase your standard of living. They don't. Just ask for money. I mean, like, if you really need it, just ask, right? Don't raise money. But these are examples of if you need to make a quick buck, it doesn't take that much work to build a site. It doesn't increase anybody's productivity, but hey, who cares, right? It's a quick buck. Make the quick buck, Be done with it. Okay? So why don't we? This is a big one. Why is it that we're not seeing this? Why isn't that productivity isn't affecting the employment situation? I actually say it's because of oil. If oil prices were at $100 a barrel, I don't think you would see these great employment numbers. Since America imports a lot of oil prices falling will always be a benefit to us. Even if we produce oil, it'll still be a benefit to us because we import oil. Okay? So we're going to be saving money, which allows us to spend in other areas or to save in other areas, which allow other places to hire workers. The problem is that's not sustainable. Now, oil may fall further, which means that if it continues to fall, I predict that we're going to see lower and lower unemployment numbers, that is. So we're going to see unemployment continue to fall. But these are short-term jobs, and these are not long-term jobs. And I would be watching productivity more. And what you're going to see there is that it's not increasing. And that's a bigger concern than whether or not we have an unemployment rate that's low. If an unemployment rate's low, but a lot of the jobs that are being created are just temporary jobs, that's not good for our economy.